The Emerald Knight, Chapter 5. Clint had been a soldier in his youth. He had trained in the barracks with the other recruits, but everyone knew that there was something different about him. Everyone knew who he was. Xandra was coronated on her 13th birthday, though everyone assumed that the young queen would leave the actual ruling of her kingdom up to her council of advisors. That did not mean that anyone would cross her, not after what happened to her parents, not after the things the poor child had already been forced to endure, or the strength that she had shown. It had been a massacre. The king was found dead in his daughter's bedchamber, where he was obviously trying to get the child and flee. Someone had slit his throat with his own weapon, and it was a miracle that the child had made it out alive. Her mother had died earlier in the night, the first sign that something terrible was about to happen. From what the healers discovered, it was a deadly potion, the type brewed only by the most powerful water mages on Zren. That seemed odd to Klin, because he had been there. He knew that the mages who had attacked had used fire magic, not water magic. He knew that the man who attacked Xandra had done so when she was alone, not when she was with her father. He knew that the corpse that haunted his dreams looked an awfully lot like the face on the coins that the castle treasurer paid him with. But he did not connect all the things he knew into an overarching thought, because that would have meant facing something that he had no ability to face. Instead, the threads wove themselves together in his dreams. He slept with the sword by his side, as Sandra had instructed, and carried it on him at all times during the day. He was there by her side the day she was crowned, in a brand new tunic the same green as the Aurelian family royal crest, with real gold embroidered all around the hemlines. If his parents hadn't died in the attack, he would have sold the tunic and used the money to buy them a new house. But they had, so he just wore it, and stood exactly where the adults running the ceremony told him to stand. And, on the cue they had given him, he stepped forward beside her and raised his sword to the heavens. The crowd was in awe. The chosen child had finally appeared to keep them safe, and had somehow managed to single-handedly fight off an attack that left many adults who had trained their entire lives in the art of war, dead at the hands of this rebellion. The boy had saved the princess, preventing the complete destruction of the royal family, and kept the government intact. He was a hero, and the festival surrounding the coronation was as much in his honor as it was the new queen's. He was the youngest person to be knighted in the history of the great nation. Xandra made it clear that he would forever be by her side. No longer would he toil in the fields, scraping by on the life of a peasant. Klin had entered the nobility in his fancy clothes, with a sword he found in a rock. It made no sense, but he was young, and he did as he was told. He stood in front of the crowd, and he managed to keep the heavy sword in the air for nearly as long as the coordinator had told him to before his arm gave out. He messed up the flourish when he put it back in the ceremonial sheath on his back, and Xandra looked at him with a smile on her mouth, but a look in her eyes that made him squirm. He knew that she was disappointed. It was not a sword made for a child. It was not a toy. It was made of thick metal, too heavy for him to even hold, let alone wield. But it was his. He had been chosen. He had pulled it free so easily that he hadn't even registered the significance at the time. He was not an ordinary child, and he was expected to do extraordinary things. He should have been able to at least hold his goddamn sword properly for 5 goddamn minutes, but instead he fucked up her important ceremony because he couldn't fucking hold something. She said none of that, but he felt it, knew it instinctively, and chided himself. The rest of the festival went off without a hitch. He didn't much care for it, but that was, in hindsight, probably good practice, because he was going to have to do a lot of things that he didn't much care for. He would much rather have been outside the feast, eating junk food and playing at the rigged games in the bazaar, instead of sitting by Xandra's side trying his best to remember to eat from the outside in. That was the only way he could remember it. If he had ever set the table like this at home, his stepmother would have tanned his hide. He wondered who was doing all those dishes and didn't say a single word throughout the meal. The sword sat heavy on his back, and it started to ache, but he didn't dare mention it or take it off. By the end of the night, he had shaken hands with countless elderly, well dressed people, and his back was killing him. It wasn't until he somehow found himself back in Xandra's room that he found the voice to say anything about it. "My back hurts," he said as he took the sword off and stretched out his sore muscles. "Does it?" she asked, as if such a thought had never occurred to her. "I thought you would be stronger. You have such well defined muscles." He suddenly felt a wave of embarrassment crash over him. She was putting him up in a castle, a royal castle, taking him to feasts, introducing him to dignitaries, fucking knighting him. And he had the unmitigated gall to bitch and complain about carrying around a sword, a sacred sword, that anyone else would kill to carry around. He had no idea how to respond without sounding like even more of a jackass. He didn't have anything to complain about. He was used to being sore. This was nothing compared to the harvest, where they'd work late into the night carrying much heavier loads. What the hell was wrong with him? Why did he say that? "Are you all right?" she asked. I'm fine," he said, and hastily added, "I'm sorry." "I suspect you aren't used to dealing with such boring people." She let down her hair, and it cascaded down her back as she reached for a brush. "Unfortunately, it is a burden that must be borne by all royalty. I've been prepared, but I fear your training has been hasty. You just don't have the skills to deal with it. What you're feeling is called stress." "I'm sorry," he said again, and took the brush that she held out to him, and stared at it. He had always cut his hair pretty short, like his father. There was no need to keep it long and have it getting in their way. "Brush my hair?" she asked, turning to look at him, with her big, honey-colored eyes, and he found himself staring into them. The brown was speckled with gold, like a cup of the expensive coffee that had been served during the feast. He had heard one of the noble women say that it came from the Fire Continent. It was delicious, like honey and cream with a hint of a bitter undertaste. He wondered how she tasted. Then he wondered what the hell was wrong with him that he would think something like that. "Clyn?" she asked, and he finally found the will to move, running the brush through her silky curls. "I think it would benefit you, now that you have a title, to learn how to act in court," she continued. "So my tutors are going to work with you." "Xandra?" he asked quietly, as he stripped off his gloves to run his fingers through her hair and forgot the rest of the question. He was touching royalty. He could be executed for this. His heart sped up, and he felt his entire body grow with a heat that he didn't understand. "Yes?" she asked, staring into the mirror of the vanity she sat at, rubbing off her makeup with a cloth and some sort of sweet-smelling tincture. When he didn't respond, she asked again, "Yes?" "I want—" he tried and willed his brain to work. He had something. When he started this conversation, he had something. He wouldn't have just opened his mouth for no reason, and now so much time had passed, and she was looking at him through the mirror, and he still had a lock of her hair in his hand. He was a goddamn idiot, and she knew it. She knew how stupid he was, and he needed to say something, say anything to prove that he could at least string a sentence together in his native fucking language. I want to learn how to use a sword, because I have one, so I should learn to use it. I mean, he was a goddamn idiot, and he was never opening his mouth again." "That's a good point," she agreed, and went back to wiping off her makeup. "You should train with the royal guards." So he did, and he stayed with them, the other children who had traveled to train and live in the barracks, inside the private sanctum of the castle walls. But there was a distinct difference between those who were fighting and training to make a living, to help their families, or to push themselves to be the best warrior possible, and the boy who was there by royal decree. Clyn could not fail tests, or be sent home, or be properly punished. Clyn could not fail. If he did, it would be the fault of the instructor, not the student. If you couldn't train the child chosen by the gods, if you had that to work with and still managed to fail, you should consider yourself worthless and resign. He kept the sword on him at all times. He learned to ignore the ever present questions. Is that really it? Can I touch it? Is it really magic? What made you so special? Why did it choose you? Why did it choose you? You.